What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're talking our top 5 big name running backs to avoid for this 2020 fantasy football season. Basically, these are guys that either had a great 2019 season or have some big name appeal. However, we don't see that projecting to a successful 2020 season at all, whether it's because they're currently being overvalued or they're just on a bad offense or they're just in a bad situation due to one reason or another. We advise you guys to avoid drafting these players. Now, before we get into it, quick reminder for everyone that's interested, go ahead, check out the description on all the information about getting a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide now. It's got top 150 overall player rankings in standard and PPR formats, individual player projections, tiers, rankings, bios, our individual list of breakout and bust candidates, along with general fantasy advice. All the details in the description, and as usual, if you guys enjoy, hit that like button and subscribe. But for now, let's get right into it. Kicking off our list, we begin with Baltimore running back Mark Ingram. And for Ingram, he actually had a pretty good 2019 season as he finished as a top 10 standard scoring running back, coming in at number 8, and right outside the top 10 in PPR formats, coming in at number 11. A big reason for that success was his very high touchdown number, 15 overall touchdowns, which put him in the upper echelon of running backs in that category. And as we all know, on a year-to-year basis, touchdowns and big plays usually see a decline. And because that touchdown number was so high, we expect a bit of a dip in 2020. But honestly, that's not even our biggest concern for Mark Ingram, because right now, there might not be a more crowded backfield in the NFL than that of the Baltimore Ravens. Not only did they already have Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, but they also drafted J.K. Dobbins in this year's NFL draft, a top 5 rookie prospect, someone that will eventually replace Mark Ingram. And oh yeah, we haven't even mentioned the fact that probably the best running back on this team is quarterback Lamar Jackson, who had himself over 1,000 yards rushing in 2019. And even if those numbers for Jackson decrease a bit, we still expect between 700 and 900 yards rushing from Jackson. So there's just a multitude of sources that will sap production from Mark Ingram. Right now, a lot of these guys on this list are being drafted in the first 4 or 5 rounds and expected to be at least, high-end RB2s, top 20 running backs. However, none of these names that we're going to mention are in the top 20 in our own personal rankings, and Mark Ingram is no different. Personally, we are going to be avoiding Mark Ingram and that Baltimore backfield in general. The best running back on that team is Lamar Jackson. We expect some offensive regression. There's too much competition, which at the end makes Mark Ingram way too great of a risk. And we don't see the likelihood of him repeating the success he had in 2019. Next up, we've got Le'Veon Bell of the New York Jets. And by Bell's standards, 2019 was an extremely disappointing season, because he finished outside the top 15 in all formats and even outside the top 20 in standard scoring. Now, right from the get-go, this tells you that Bell is more so of a PPR running back because of what he can do due to his pass catching, which is another reason that you should be a little bit wary of him in standard formats. However, Bell is still being drafted as a RB2 type of guy, someone in the first 4 rounds. And honestly, we can't endorse that because the New York Jets are all types of trouble, or at least they project to be in 2020, more so than any other team that we're going to mention here. The New York Jets offensive line, sure, they did some nice things in the NFL draft, but that hasn't been solved. Quarterback-wise, Sam Darnold still has a lot of room to improve. And also, Le'Veon Bell himself, well, there's question marks about the type of role he will have in this offense because the commitment from the coaching staff to Bell is questionable at best. The addition of Frank Gore is also a bit troubling because as old as Frank Gore is, his presence will take away some opportunities from Le'Veon Bell, who did struggle as a pure rusher last year to begin with. And honestly, wherever Frank Gore has gone these last couple of years, he's still managed to really sap some fantasy production from the starting running back. We expect the same situation with Bell. But the biggest thing here is, like we said, this New York Jets offense, it's probably going to be one of the ones to avoid for this 2020 season. And anytime you are in a situation like that where you've probably got a top five, bottom of the barrel offense, it's not going to be friendly for real life scoring or for fantasy scoring. We expect another tough season, and we hate to admit it, but Le'Veon Bell's best days are probably behind him at this point. Continuing on, we have got Melvin Gordon, and we were actually pretty excited about the possibility of where Gordon might land during free agency. And then he goes ahead and joins the Denver Broncos. Honestly, one of the worst situations he could have wound up in as far as fantasy football production is concerned, because in 2019, without Gordon, the Denver Broncos already had a running back by committee with Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman. Now, by adding Melvin Gordon, well, effectively, you've negated the upside of every single one of those running backs. And it's extremely unfortunate because out of every running back on this list, Melvin Gordon is by far the most in his prime up until this point. He's extremely talented as a pure rusher, as a pass catcher, but situation-wise, it's an awful one. And even if there is an injury, well, there's still going to be a third running back that has something to say about the other having sole possession of the backfield, whether that's Phillip Lindsay or Royce Freeman. And to begin with, a lot of this offensive success for the Broncos will depend on the maturation of Drew Lock. Even though in limited opportunities in 2019, he showed us some nice things, the question is, what will we see from him in 2020? If the rookie doesn't progress, well, this entire offense might take a step back, which is what makes the Denver Broncos offense inherently risky. And for that reason, as long as Melvin Gordon is on the Denver Broncos, even if he is the highest paid running back there, that might get him some leg up on the competition. However, we don't think he will be able to sustain it for the full season. Phillip Lindsay is extremely talented. He had over 1,000 yards rushing yet again in 2019. These guys are all fantasy football running backs that should be avoided in 2020. Next up, we've got Marlon Mack of the Indianapolis Colts. And Mack was actually a player that we were pretty excited about in 2020 because he got a chance to play behind one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, along with having added Phillip Rivers, who brings some much needed legitimacy to this offense and makes all of those weapons much more respectable. However, all of this changed after the Indianapolis Colts drafted Jonathan Taylor in the second round of the NFL draft. And now the Colts have pretty much come out and said that they expect Mack and Taylor to form a 1-2 punch. And this translates to a running back by committee, which is the death of a running back in fantasy football. Now, sure, Mack will have probably the leg up on Jonathan Taylor, but we expect a dip in his volume big time in 2020 compared to 2019. Mack has never been a pass-catching option for the Colts. Nyheim Hines will hold that role for Indianapolis, so that really tells you that the PPR ceiling for Mack is limited to begin with, which makes him more so of a standard option. And as long as Jonathan Taylor is healthy, well, we don't expect that many blow-up games for Mack. He finished with over 1,000 yards in 2019. We struggle to see how that will happen again in 2020. And we know that Mack has struggled to stay healthy for an entire season before. And if that happens, even for a slight window, and Jonathan Taylor has a lot of success during that time, well, Mack might completely lose his role, which makes him even that much riskier. Basically, with Mack and Jonathan Taylor there, they're both similar type of players. We have similar type of projections for both of them, but as long as they both start for the Indianapolis Colts, neither one can be trusted. And finally, we have got Raheem Mostert of the San Francisco 49ers. Now, a lot of people might be excited about Mostert. I mean, after all, the 49ers did trade Matt Breida to the Miami Dolphins, and Mostert did have a strong finish to the season, especially during the playoffs for San Francisco. But we're here to remind you, don't forget about the other running backs in this backfield, specifically the highly paid running backs. Look at Tevin Coleman. He got paid big time by the 49ers last year. Same with Jerick McKinnon a couple years ago. And Jeff Wilson, he's not in that category, but he showed us that he can be trusted in limited opportunities in 2019. But the biggest thing here is that the 49ers, even when they had healthy options available to them in 2019, well, they didn't necessarily favor one guy over the other. They went with whoever was having production, whoever was having a good game, which means that neither one of these running backs, whether it's Raheem Mostert to begin with or someone else afterwards, is going to have a set play time or a set snap count. So for that reason, they are all difficult to trust. If there's some injuries that take place here, yes, there is room for some serious upside just because of how much the 49ers rush the football and the good offensive line that they have. But as long as the scenario remains what it is right now, Raheem Mostert, even though he might be a nice story, he is tough to trust for fantasy purposes. If he doesn't have, that one or two big plays during the week, we think that his fantasy production on a week-to-week basis overall will be pretty disappointing. So with that, we wrap up our look into this list of some big name running backs that you guys should be avoiding for the 2020 fantasy football season. And as always, let us hear it in the comments section. Are there some other names that you think belong on this list? Are some of the guys that we mentioned, maybe unfairly so in your eyes, included? And if so, why? Also, let us hear any other fantasy questions you guys might have. We will do our best to answer them. And another quick reminder for all those interested, check out the description on how to get a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide now. It's got everything you could want at a great price. And as always, if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in future videos.